All right. Well, thank you all for logging on this morning and joining us for another workshop. This one we've called Designing Effective Measures for Non-Degree Units. So we just wanted to touch base with everyone and go over some of the best practices and tips and tricks for getting those outcomes and measures written, since we are coming up on our IE plan deadline. It's in February, but as we can see from this semester, that'll be here before we know it, right? So we wanted to take some time to get together today and talk through that. I think we all know each other, but just to be safe, I'm Allie Michael. I'm the Assistant Director for IEA. Amanda?
And I'm Amanda Wormhoff. I'm the Director of IEA.
So our IE cycle follows the continuous improvement cycle. Hopefully this doesn't look completely foreign to you since we've kind of talked about this before. But this is the cycle that we follow with our IE process. And today what we really wanted to focus on was that part of planning those assessments. So getting those effective measures to assess your outcomes. So that's what we really want to focus on today. We want to have some discussion later on in this presentation to where we can help you with your own measures for your units as well. So why do we do IE? What's the point behind it? It's more than just checking a box. It's more than just doing it because SAC-COC tells us that we have to do it. That is part of it, of course, but it goes beyond that. So it's all about us getting together as groups within our own units, departments, areas, what have you, and capturing agreement about what matters. It's providing direction for what we do in our day-to-day lives, and it provides a way for us to determine if that progress is being made or not. So it helps us to leverage our strengths and to improve on our weaknesses. So I did mention SACs. We can't really talk about IE without talking about SAC-COC. So there are two sections that we focus on for IE. 7.3 is the one that focuses on administrative units. And then 8.2c focuses on academic and student support services units. So I think today with our attendees, we have actually both of these represented. So we have a good group of people here today. If you're interested in those, I would encourage you to read the SAC-COC Principles of Accreditation. It's a riveting read. But that kind of guides us with the compliance part of the IE process. And Amanda, you take over for the strategic planning part.
Yeah, in these workshops, we usually do talk about the relationship between institutional effectiveness and strategic planning, but that has actually become even more important as the university is embarking on the new strategic plan, which is sort of still being developed. We have the major pillars and the objectives, and now the president's office is working on tactics and measures. So I've been in conversation with those folks, and we're going to keep working together so that the IE process supports strategic planning and vice versa, so that they don't feel so separate. But I do just want to make these distinctions, and I will mention that Kat Bailey is organizing workshops for strategic planning, which you may have seen, and we're going to have some more in the spring, and we'll have one that's specifically focused on IE and strategic planning later in the spring as well. So IE is really about the present. What's happening right now? What is your daily operations, the daily things that you do? Whereas strategic planning is more future looking. It's where do we want to go? What are our goals over the next 2, 3, 5 years? So they support each other. What we do on a daily basis should be building us toward what our strategic plan goals are. But essentially the way they're worded might be different, right? So future looking goal might be we want to increase enrollment by X, or we want to have, the premier program in XYZ. Whereas IE would be something that you're doing in your office on a daily basis to support sort of regular operations. So there are places that they're going to overlap, and then there's places where they might be separate. It just kind of depends. But the bottom line is that I want to send you with today is that some of the measures that we're talking about today that you'll develop for IE you will, and we hope you will, be able to use those related to strategic planning as well. If your office is asked to report on some of the objectives or the pillars, a lot of those measures are going to overlap. Now, there might be some measures that are strictly strategic plan measures, and some measures that are strictly related to your daily operations for IE, but there should be quite a bit of overlap eventually, once we know more about the strategic plan. So this is just a fun little graphic to help us think about how this all fits together. So the mission, the university mission, guides everything. The strategic plan, it guides your unit mission and your unit outcomes in an indirect way. And then within your unit, you've got your little mission, your outcomes come from that mission, and your measures support those outcomes because it helps you understand how you are or are not meeting those outcomes for your unit, your office, your program, whatever. Now, we hope eventually that your unit outcomes can be aligned or roll up to the strategic plan pillars and objectives. We'll be asking you probably to do that in some loose way for the plan in February. That will be part of the new template. That'll kind of be a pilot of that because the strategic plan is so new and we don't really know how things are going to fit together, but we kind of just want to see how that will turn out. And then for the measures, you're already developing measures for us for IE. So our hope is that some of those can be repurposed for some of the strategic plan measures that your office might be asked to do. So essentially more to come, but we're trying to make it as streamlined as possible for you. Ellie, do you want me to talk about this?
I can go ahead. So we have two phases to our IE cycle. One we just finished was the IE reporting cycle or phase, which I'm sure you all fondly recall, getting those reports submitted back in September. So what we're gearing up for again now is the planning phase. So due February 15th is your plan for the next IE cycle, which is the 2023 to 24, which just sounds weird to say that out loud. But that's where you're going to include your mission statements, your outcomes, your assessment measures, and then your achievement targets for those measures. So that's what constitutes the plan. And then you use that to do your report in September. And that includes the results, the reflective analysis, and the action plan, which is basically closing the loop. So we really want these two phases to inform one another. So you will be receiving feedback from the IE committee before the end of the semester. So the IE committee is hard at work reviewing those results reports now, and we'll be getting those back from them in the next week or so. We'll compile feedback reports and send them to all units by the end of the semester. And you can use that feedback to inform your plan for the next IE cycle. So we want those to kind of talk to each other along the way. That's the way that we have set this up for you. So that's where we are in the cycle there. So for your IE plan, for non-degree units, which is what everybody here is, what you need is a mission statement. Make sure that is included. All units must have outcomes. We ask for at least one administrative unit outcome for each major service or function. You have to have a minimum of 2 AUOs per unit. If you are classified as academic and student support services units, you may also have a student learning outcome. However, that's not a requirement because we know that not every unit has the means to assess student learning or the contact with students or what have you. So if that is appropriate for you, though, you can certainly have an SLO as well. Then you also need to have at least one direct measure for each outcome and a specific achievement target for each of those measures. And what I do want to kind of emphasize on this is that you can assess outcomes across multiple years. So you don't have to come up with brand new outcomes every single year. We get asked that a lot. People will say, oh, well, do we have to come up with a whole new outcome or is it okay to do this again? No, we actually encourage you to use the same outcomes. You may change your measures, you may change your targets, but the outcome does not necessarily have to change. You may have a group of outcomes that you do, I'm going to do these 2 this year, these 2 the next, and then I'm going to go back to those previous 2 for the next year. So that's completely up to you how you do that. But you don't have to come up with completely new outcomes every year. We do have our IE planning team in Microsoft Teams, which I know you're all familiar with at this point. That's where we keep all of those plans and results and newsletters and all that other fun stuff. The feedback reports will be there as well. And then we also have a lot of resources on our website, which the link is here. And as Amanda just shared in the chat, we'll share these slides with everybody. We'll put that on our website, in the Teams, all of that. And just as a reminder, our IE plans are due February 15th. So another resource that we have available for you, we are doing a staff-focused assessment redesign institute, the ARI. So we started the ARI 2 years ago, Amanda, is that right? Ish. And it was a faculty-focused professional development program. So it particularly focused on degree programs. But we thought, as we were working through it with the faculty this last summer, that it would be something really beneficial for staff as well. So we are working on developing a staff ARI. We're going to hold that on December 12th through the 14th of this year. I know that that's the week that for a lot of staff, we catch up on things during that week because faculty and students aren't on campus, but it's also a good time for us to focus on something like this. So we will have sessions each of those days about an hour and a half long. And then on that final day, on the 14th, it will be a working lunch for us. We're guessing that it'll be about 7.5 hours worth of work for us, including those meeting times, and then a little bit of time outside to do some work together. So not a huge time commitment, but I do know that for many of us that is a commitment. So we wanted to be upfront about that. But this would be really helpful for you to help to develop those outcomes and those measures, to help you understand the assessment process a little better. And we just think it'll be a really beneficial thing. We've already had several units apply for it. The deadline to apply is next Tuesday. So if you're interested, the link is there in the slides. Please feel free to fill out that application online, or you can also reach out to me if you have any questions about that.
And we hope that this is something you can, put on your resume and your performance review, that you can use to kind of take with you as a professional development achievement that you've completed, if you do the work, if you do the ARI.
Yeah, and I see, Anna Carey, you asked if it was a virtual option. I know that final meeting we'll do in person. I think we could maybe work out for the other meetings to be virtual. But that's something that we could discuss further if your unit really wanted to participate.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And the nice thing about this is kind of how we've done it with the faculty one as well. The nice thing about this format where it's a small group is that we can kind of tailor it to the group's needs and availability. So hopefully that's something we could do with the group we get for this. We'll corral the group who's applied and wants to do it, and then we reach out to them to say, hey, what's your availability looking like? What's going to be a challenge for you? And we do our best to accommodate that.
Amanda, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes, Ellie isn't feeling very well, so I'm going to take over while she has a coughing fit. Please feel free to step away, Ellie. Okay, so we thought it'd be helpful to just do a quick review of outcomes before we dive into the measures. So refresher, every unit needs to have a set of outcomes that relate to your mission and describe your current operations. So as Allie mentioned, I really want to stress this. The outcomes are not like performance goals where you have to come up with new ones every year. You can really just have a static-ish set of outcomes for your office, and then you assess them on whatever yearly cycle you think works for you. And we talked about the fact that every unit no matter the size, should have at least 2 AUOs. Usually we say 1 outcome for every major service or function. That's not always possible if you're like an office of 1, but you're doing 5 different functions. So, you know, a minimum 2, usually no more than 6. 6 is a lot for an administrative unit or an academic and student support services unit. So we just wanted to share with you, not as a golden example, but just this idea of like a set of outcomes. This is what ours look like. So this is our unit mission for IEA. We're an administrative unit since we don't work with students directly. And these are our outcomes. So if you read through the outcomes, you'll see that in my office, we do several things and I have personnel related to each of those things. So for instance, Gina McCullough is our QAF coordinator. So that's a major service for which I have an employee. So we have actually a whole outcome here related to the QAF process. And then we have a couple of the other ones parsed out by things, you know, that maybe our office is charged with. Now these can change, we could tweak these over the years, but these are sort of our 4 main ones, with the 4th one kind of being in development. Our plan is to assess all of these every fiscal or academic year, but we could spread them out if we wanted to and do like 2 this year and 2 next year. It's really up to us, but this is kind of, this is sort of like saying what your office or your unit is about and what you hope to achieve on sort of a yearly basis. So types of outcomes, I know you've all seen this before, but just if you or others in your unit need a refresher, the folks on this meeting are primarily concerned with administrative unit outcomes. As Ellie mentioned, there are a few academic and student support services units that also have student learning outcomes because they work with students more directly and are able to assess that. But primarily what we're talking about is AUOs, administrative unit outcomes. And again, those are about your current operations. Any outcome, whether it's an SLO or an AUO, should focus on that current service or process. This one is important. Should be under the control or responsibility of your unit. This was actually kind of challenging for us in IEA when we came up with our outcomes, because what we do a lot of, and a lot of what you all do, is support others in the things that they're doing to achieve a goal, right? So it's like, I can't make every unit do XYZ, but I support them to do that. So we had to really think about this so that our outcomes weren't things that we couldn't actually influence. Like, it's nice to want to support increased graduation rates, but you probably have a pretty indirect relationship with that, right? So rather, you should focus on the thing that you do to support those graduation rates, whatever that might be. That's just an example. Make sure you can measure them. That's kind of important. But what we're going to talk about today is how you might measure those things. It's not always as nice and clear as we want it to be, but there are ways to do that. And most importantly, it's an outcome that, you know, while it focuses on your current operations, it is something that you could always improve on. We can always all improve on the things that we're doing in our offices. And you want to keep them as simple as possible. What you don't want, what we call a bundled outcome, where there's like actually 4 different things within one outcome. Sometimes we try to do too much in one outcome. So really, you might actually have 4 different outcomes in a compound statement that you've written for your AUO. So keep it simple. I would stick to one thing in each outcome as much as you possibly can. And we want them to really be things that aren't yes, no. So, you know, we will hold faculty development workshops. We either did or we didn't, right? That's a yes or a no. That's not really about the quality or the satisfaction or the effectiveness. So you want to work that in. So it would be something more like, our office plans to hold high quality and effective faculty development workshops. And then you can assess with your participants whether they were high quality or effective, rather than did we have them or did we not? Okay. Here's some of the things that I sort of just mentioned that you can assess with your AUOs. Things like, is it efficient? Is it accurate? Is it effective? Those are the kinds of words you can use actually in the outcomes. And what comprehensive means in your unit isn't going to be the same as what it means in somebody else's unit. The nice part is you get to define what comprehensive is, or what quality is, or what client satisfaction is. And sometimes we have like external organizations that can help us do that, or industry standards. But for the most part, you know what you want to achieve as a unit. You know what you mean by high quality, or if you don't, you should have that conversation amongst yourselves. And we can also help you kind of operationalize those terms if you're struggling with, I don't know how to measure efficiency, or I'm not sure how to measure what client satisfaction is for my unit. We're happy to talk through that with you. Sometimes you need somebody outside the unit to sort of think about it with fresh eyes to help you get to a place where you can create measures for those things. Okay, there's a lot of examples on this slide, and some of you probably have seen these before. But we just wanted to give really basic examples of sort of these different facets of AUOs and what outcomes for those items might look like. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Too much clicking. And you can see all of these are pretty simple and basic. You don't have to be overly complex in your outcomes. In fact, it's better if you're not. So for instance, efficiency, the foundation processes donation receipts in a timely manner. So what does timely manner mean? They get to decide that, and then they assess whether they've met that goal. So maybe internally they have sort of a standard or a goal that they want to process those receipts within 7 business days. So they can design a measure to do that. They can also design a measure to assess their clients' experience of that. So it could be, do the people they're affecting think it's timely? That's kind of what is their definition of timely, and do they feel like they're getting service in a timely manner? But all of these are fairly similar in the fact that there are things that need to be defined by the unit within that outcome. So what is an effective new employee onboarding service? You have to decide what that means to you. Or you need to ask your participants what they think is an effective onboarding activity. Allie, anything else you want to say about these?
No, I think that looks good.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make you talk. Just a reminder about this, the SLOs, if that's something that fits your unit. This is about what students should be able to know or think or do after your event service program. And we do have several units that have SLOs that are non-degree units. So these are just some examples that we adapted from actual APSU offices. They're not exactly, but they're pretty close. So for instance, the library works obviously more closely with students on particular sessions. Things like the peer leader program, they're working with students on a regular basis. It might be that an office, a support office, is offering a presentation on some wellness initiative or student development initiative, and they can assess whether students have retained that information or they can understand that information using like an exit survey or a post-session survey. And then disability services, for example, they want students to be able to sort of communicate effectively on their own, and they have designed ways to assess that. So we just thought it'd be helpful if you're struggling with, does this suit me and my unit? Maybe not, but this gives you a new way to kind of think about it if you're not sure how you might design an SLO. All right, we're going to move on to talking about measuring outcomes, but we can stop and ask if you have any questions just about requirements or outcomes themselves. Great. Feel free to pop anything in the chat or raise a hand, and one of us will answer, probably me, because Allie can't talk. In terms of measures, so these are just some examples. These are things that we see a lot of. Offices like ours often have a lot of quantitative data, like how many people attended XYZ or how many X we processed this month or whatever those sort of counts are. How, what our average response time was, that kind of thing. Those are all great measures. So depending on your outcome, those kind of counts or tracking, that might serve you well. But when it comes to things like that are a little more squishy, like satisfaction or effectiveness, those are things that you really need to get kind of your clients or the people that you serve, you need to get their feedback. And so I've seen a large increase in the use of surveys for this. And I think that's great if they're done well. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it could also be things like focus groups. There are some units that have just kind of gotten together groups of people who they serve, whether that's faculty or other staff or students, and talked about their services. It could be observation, of, for instance, a peer leader in a classroom or something like that, or other employees. But I would say surveys are the number one tool there, and they're useful to all of us, but we want to think about using them effectively. Then some of us actually have external comparisons. That we might have standards that we have to meet. So for example, in our office, that's THEC's quality assurance funding. So they have particular standards that we have to meet. So our measures are often related to those standards. But we also want to get the folks that we work with, we want to get their perceptions of our service on that as well. So that's where we might use a survey or a focus group or something like that. But some of us have those kind of outside compliance things that we have to do, and our measures can be related to that as well. So I want to stress the things that are in red. Any measure that you design should be directly and obviously related to the outcome. What that means is if somebody outside your office is reading the measure and reading the outcome and they can't see how those things go together, you need to explain that in your plan. So that's a place where you want to give us, it doesn't have to be super long, but as long as it's clear how that measure measures that outcome, just make sure that that is explained in your plan so that somebody else can understand that, and maybe so that you're thinking about it, just in case you haven't totally thought through that yourself. Number two, and this is a SAC COC thing, but obviously we want to make sure we're serving everybody at in the APSU community, whether they're on the Clarksville campus or not, or whether they're in person or not. So whatever measure you design, do your best to make sure that it assesses every instructional site and delivery method that your office employs. So do you have, are you serving people at Fort Campbell or at dual enrollment sites or something else? Do you have online services? Make sure that those are included in the data that you're collecting as much as you possibly can. And the last one on the left in red is the most important one. If the assessment measure does not give you actionable results, things that you can use to make decisions and take actions, then it's not a good measure. If it's a measure and you get the results and you just look at it and go, that doesn't mean anything to me, then you need to redesign your measure. The most important thing is that it creates information for you to make decisions. But there are other considerations on the other side. On the right in black, manageable and practical. Can't stress this enough. If it's a measure that you don't have the manpower or the resources or the time to execute, it's not a good measure. So I know that we're all strapped and busy, so it might feel like no measure is doable, but you really want to think about the practicality of the thing that you're trying to do and use existing things that you're collecting as much as possible. Surveys are something you have to create usually, but once it's created, it's pretty automated. If you haven't used Qualtrics before for surveys, it's actually pretty easy, and we're happy to help with that, as is DSIR. They're very good at using Qualtrics in that office as well. But again, if you can't actually use it and execute it, it's not helpful to you. In your plan, say as much as you can about the measure. Who is doing it? Who are you giving the measure to? Or what are you getting back from them? When do you give this measure? Where does that happen? Is it online? Is it at an event? Is it during a service? Is it immediately after a service? And how are you getting that information as much as you can possibly explain that? So just, a nice little description that someone outside your office could read and understand what that measure is. And this is another thing that I wanted to stress. I don't think we have anybody from Student Affairs here today, but I know this is something we've discussed with a lot of their offices who have a lot of events for students and whatnot, especially over the pandemic time. Yes, you want a nice sample size. Yes, you want enough data for those results to be meaningful. However, what the fine print here says is that we fully recognize that not every event or assessment measure is going to gather a whole slew of data. Like you might serve 200 faculty members, but maybe you get 3 to respond, right? That happens, or students for that matter. So 2 things. Number 1, it's okay if you feel like that's enough for you to make decisions. If it's a small sample size, just recognize that in your reflective analysis, acknowledge that you only got 5 responses or whatever, but that you feel comfortable making a decision in your unit based on that number. Or I should say, you can say, we didn't get a bunch of responses. We don't feel comfortable taking actions based on that. So we're going to do it again next semester or next year. And we're going to collect more data over 2 years and see then what the results show. It's okay to say that if you feel like you haven't gotten enough data to make a decision, but you need to detail that when you do your results report. And we ask you about what actions you plan to take or what you found. So I just wanted to stress that it's okay if you're getting small amounts of data, but you just need to discuss that and address it when you get to the part where you're writing the results report. Just a quick note about achievement targets. So whatever your measure is, whether it's a survey or a count of participants or an assessment of timeliness of turnaround of something in your office, you want to have an achievement target. So that's where you kind of operationalize what effective is or what quality is or what satisfaction is. So maybe it's that on a satisfaction survey, you want all your services to be rated at a 4 out of 5, or you want everyone to be at least satisfied or very satisfied. So you want maybe 80% of your respondents to be satisfied or very satisfied. We just want you to design a target for that measure that you think is pretty good. So we often get the question like, what should my target be? You really have to determine that. But usually what we say is, make it realistic, but a little aspirational, right? So the ideal is that we do everything excellently 100% of the time, right? But we all know that's not true for most things. So you might want to give yourself at least a B level target. So we say, maybe it's like 80% or 4 out of 5, whatever that thing is. And you can always change the target later. So if you find that you're well surpassing it, then you can raise your standard for yourself the next time you do the assessment. But so we generally try to have you think about what is realistic based on what we've done in the past, what is achievable, but maybe a little aspirational. And then sometimes it's just, what does our boss want us to do? Right? So sometimes it's maybe your VP or your director or whatever says, you have to get back to students within 1 day or whatever the thing is. And you can use that for your standard. So this sort of just says what I already said. They should be as specific as possible. Try to stay away from vague terms like we want to do all or we want it to be better. Try to make it quantitative as much as you can. On some measures like focus groups, it's going to be hard to have it be quantitative, and that's okay. But you can think about what you want your target to be for that and just describe it well in your plan. But in general, quantitative targets are good. Numbers are good. I did want to mention one thing. So using item analysis when appropriate is very important. especially in things like surveys or questionnaires or polls that you might give, rather than using an overall result on a survey, thinking about what your responses were on each question, which probably relates to a different aspect of service or function, is kind of a better way to look at your results for that measure. So that's important to think about. How can I break down this measure into parts where that's appropriate, depending on what kind of measure it is. All right, well, I'm going to stop talking for a little while. And I want just to, if you want to share, if you're in the mood, what measures have you used in your unit? Or what questions do you have for us about those measures, or just generally?
Hey, Amanda and Ellie, Anna Carey. So I love that slide. I think it that had the examples with, efficiency, accuracy, effectiveness, and all those things for AUOs. I think that's super helpful. As an academic service, part of academic affairs, we have typically had to have at least one student learning outcome as well. Would you suggest that same list of words? I saw the AUO at the, it's like, seemed specific to AUO, so I didn't know if you had a different list for SLOs specifically, or if you would suggest using those.
We don't have a specific list specifically for SLOs other than the examples that we shared, but we could definitely gather some of those and create a resource, because I think that's probably the number one struggle that units have.
Yeah, no, I'm like, oh, this makes it so clear.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's trickier because the way that your types of units interact with students is all so different. But I do think there's a lot of good examples out there. And part of what our office does is like, we try to curate examples from other sites and places and make it digestible. So we're happy to work on that and share that with you.
Okay, yeah.
And everyone, not just you, but
yeah, I was just curious if you had a different list or not.
no, we don't. Actually, when we were working on putting these slides together, that came up. And that's partially why I pulled some examples from APSU plans, but they're all so varied that I think it would be helpful to get some external examples of how that's being done well, maybe at other places. So
okay, awesome. Thank you.
Definitely share.
And I do want to note for those academic and student support services units, you can use either AUOs or SLOs. You're not required to have an SLO. You can do any mixture of AUOs or SLOs. If you don't have an SLO, we just ask that I think before in Nuventive, we had you provide a rationale for not having SLOs, but I don't believe we have that on our new forms because we just understand that some units can't do that. So don't feel like you have to, kind of, I don't know, finagle
make
your
one for the sake
services
of
to make
making
it
one.
work.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if it doesn't come naturally to your unit to have an SLO, don't feel like you have to make that happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just to be transparent, that's kind of one of the things that we're not sure how that will be perceived in our SACS review. So the information that we've gotten suggests that the way that we're doing it now is pretty common from them. But I think it would be helpful to get it. They have, as most of you know, they sometimes have like hidden expectations that we don't know about. So I think we'll get a lot more information from our initial review from SACS if there's something, wrong with that approach. But based on the SACS sessions we've been to, having units sort of determine that for themselves is a reasonable thing. Other thoughts or questions? Well, I wanted to reiterate some items about surveys, because I've seen such an uptick in the use of those from admin and academic student support services units, which I think is great. But I did want to just check in about a couple items related to that. So surveys are only good if they measure what you're trying to measure. So make sure that your questions align with the thing that you're trying to measure in the outcome. If you aren't sure how to do that, or you have no idea how to write a good survey question, Google is your friend. And also, Allie and I are happy to read a survey and give you some feedback on it. When you describe the measure in your plan, if you're using a survey, if not all the survey items are being used to measure that outcome, that's okay, but just specify that in your description. Indicate that there are certain questions that align with the outcome that you'll be using for this measure, but the other ones aren't relevant. Because sometimes we need to just send one survey and ask a bunch of different things, some of which are related to the measure and some of which might not be. And again, ask for help. We're a good resource. I know that GSIR would also be happy to help you with Qualtrics, like I mentioned, if that's something that you want to put in there. And then this is kind of related to what I said earlier. If only certain survey items relate to the measure or the outcome that you're trying to assess, don't lump all those into the results either. Make sure you're looking at just the questions that assess the outcome, and that's what you're writing up in your results. In most cases, you probably want to plan to conduct an item analysis, meaning looking at the responses to every item in your survey that relate to that outcome, rather than just saying, overall average on this survey was 4 out of 5. That doesn't really help you parse out where you might need improvement. So thinking about that when you get to the results report phase as well. And the last thing I want to mention is several of you might know that we have a survey administration policy at the university, and we actually have a committee that approves and reviews surveys that go out to the APSU community based on that policy. Dr. Andrew Luna chairs that committee. I'm a member, but there's lots of other members. In general, surveys that are used for IE assessment and only used internally for that single purpose are exempt from being reviewed under the survey policy. If it's just something that you're using to assess an outcome internally or for continuous improvement purposes internally, you do not need to submit it. But two things. One, if you plan to use that in any other way and share it with any other people outside APSU, you probably want to submit it for review. And secondly, you might just want to submit it for review because whether or not they need to approve it, because the committee is full of people who can give you really great feedback on the quality of your survey items and give you ideas that you might not have. The other thing is they see a lot of surveys come through there, so they might know that some other office is giving a survey that could give you useful information. But in general, we're allowed to kind of develop and send those out. But I strongly encourage you to get their feedback if you feel like you need some assistance. All right, bottom line, we're bottom lining it. The whole point of this is just to assess effectiveness and make improvements. So we always like to say this, what your results are don't actually matter to us. What matters in our office, what matters to us is that you have a process that is giving you meaningful results, that is helping you take actions to improve or enhance or expand the services of your office or unit. So it's not about doing well or not on your measures for our purposes. It's about the fact that you have measures and you're looking at them and you're talking about what you might do better or what you're already doing well. I know we keep hammering this, but you can't put it out enough. February 15th is when your IE plan for next year is due. And Allie mentioned this already, but at the bottom, you'll see this committee review process. So right now, October, November, they're reviewing those reports that you all submitted in September, and we'll get that feedback to you by December, end of December, as Allie mentioned. And then once you submit this 23-24 plan in February, they will review those as well and provide you feedback that we will aim to get you by May. And then over the summer, you're welcome to make improvements. We encourage you to make improvements to your plan based on that feedback if you feel like that's necessary, and then resubmit your plan to us by the start of the next academic year or fiscal year, whatever is most relevant to you. And I just wanted to mention, if you haven't experienced this before, that feedback is about the quality of the plan or the quality of the report. So it's not about the results that you get or how well your office is doing at meeting your outcomes. It's, are the outcomes good? Are the measures related to the outcomes? That kind of stuff. So it's a quality of plan review or quality of results report review when they get that back to you. And they're your colleagues. This is a really truly meant to be a formative peer review. It's not meant to be punitive. They're not experts in your area and they know that. So they're just trying to give you some advice as sort of outsiders, another set of eyes. And if you ever have any questions about that feedback or how to implement it, or if it means anything to you, Allie and I are happy to help talk you through that as well. So primarily I work with degree and certificate programs and Allie works with non-degree programs, but we're both here to help you at any point. No words, Allie, I know you're not feeling well.
No, sorry, I couldn't do more. I tell you what, I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and then if we have any additional questions, we can answer those.